Scott Kleinfelter will introduce our speaker.
Good morning. Jeff Rufus Byrd is a performance and video artist who has exhibited in major cities across the United States, Canada, Finland, Germany, Switzerland, Poland, Colombia, Mexico, Italy, China, and Cuba, and the United Kingdom. His art explores the relationship between reality and fiction through the use of masks and costumes. He assumes it takes fake identities to examine gender and power. Born in the Deep South, Byrd is a first-generation college student at the University of Alabama. His mother cried when he learned that he had planned to major in art, and he earned a graduate degree from the University of Florida. Byrd has taught at the University of Northern Iowa for the past 32 years. He was head of the Department of Art for the past 15 years before returning to the classroom and studio last August, where he also has changed his name. Please give a warm welcome to Jeff Rufus Byrd.
Thank you. I really appreciate being invited here. Thank you, Byron. And I also want to thank David for handling the tech today. It's going to be great. That long list of places that I have presented work, I don't include that to sound like I'm, flexing on how much I get to travel. It's more that it's just kind of amazing that that's actually happened to me, considering where I was coming from. And before we start, I wanted to say, I tend to use words like queer and sissy and strange and weirdo, and I don't use them to offend anybody, because I know probably everybody in the room has been called at least one of those things. I use them because it's a way of taking the sting out of them. That it's a sting that people carry with them, I can tell you, for a very, very long time. And as you can see, though, I am a bit of a weirdo. For those of you that aren't familiar with performance art, we do strange things for good reasons, I like to say. Let's go ahead and go to the next. So this tells you a little bit about where I grew up. Russellville, Alabama was our mailing address, but we actually lived about 20 minutes away from Russellville in this community called Tharptown. Just saying that sounds so weird, doesn't it? Tharptown. And as you can see, though, Russellville was the 7th worst place to live in Alabama. And I was a first-generation college student. Even in the wider picture of my family, my father had, I can never remember, 9 or 11 siblings. And even out of all of those cousins that existed, I was the first one to go to college. And so it was a strange thing that happened at that point. And yes, my mom did cry. So for a while, I lied and said I was majoring in advertising. The only books that were in our house were the Bible and a set of World Book encyclopedias that was about 10 years out of date, which, considering we're in Alabama, everything was 10 years out of date. So I had 2 older sisters, about 10 years older than me, and I was definitely a surprise. And that was actually the most fortunate thing, because by this point, my parents were totally through with raising kids. So as a child, I just had this sort of free reign. It was benign neglect. I just wandered around on my own. And we lived, out in the boonies. And that was amazing. It was so boring out there. That's when I learned to make art. And I look at that time as this kind of golden period where everything that I am now was rooted in all of that. It was this world of drawing things and reading and running around and climbing trees and pretending to be other things, which is a lot of what I do today. And that was all amazing. It wasn't until I got to school that I found it out how absolutely weird I was. And that was that sense of, coming into the wider part of society, being around other kids. I thought everybody was like me. And then I found, oh, no, they're not. And they were adamant about enforcing those kinds of borders of conformity. I recently wrote an article about this where I said that, they would beat me with the little fists of conformity. And they did. I was a target. I was bullied all the time. And of course, in a place like that, the adults didn't tend to do much about it. Probably the adults thought that those kids were doing the right thing by straightening me out. But I didn't know any of this had anything to do with being gay. I didn't even know what that was. I mean, that comes much, much later. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. But what made the big difference was being able to, what's going? I'll just keep talking. Oh, there we go. PBS made me gay. I stole that line from Tim Miller, but I swear to God, he doesn't deserve it. He was in California. But it was like, TV, and my parents didn't care how much I watched TV. It's fine. You go do you, just don't get too loud. But it was like all of a sudden, there were these people that, like Mr. Rogers. God, I love him. He liked me just the way I was. And that's exactly what I needed to hear. And then there was Carl Sagan talking about all this amazing stuff about how big the world was and how big the universe was. I watched Arthur Fiedler. I mean, what a little sissy I was. It was just amazing. So it's like I had this sense that there was definitely more out there that was worth looking into. And I'll say another thing that was very important to me: Mary Tyler Moore. Driving off to some city, getting a job. If she could do it, I could do. I knew it. And so I think I had a kind of determination that I do give my credit family for. I mean, we're all really pig-headed and independent. Having Depression era parents teaches you a lot about frugality, but also stick-to-itiveness. And so I just wasn't going to hear those messages about how that kind of stuff wasn't worth doing, or how that sort of thinking would, get you into trouble or lead you to ruin. So I went off to the University of Alabama and made that, commitment to making art, because I'd always made things. I just didn't know what to call it. I didn't know what to call it. And this is when I also sort of found out about the whole gay thing. Like, it was a relief, there wasn't something wrong with me. I was just gay. And there were all of these other people that were gay too. And we were, formed this kind of, as our Maupin calls it, a found family, or a chosen family. Embracing these people that cared about each other. And that was very important. I studied painting for a while, but after I discovered this artist, Dwayne Michaels, and some of you may be familiar with him, I just started taking photography classes. And what's interesting about Dwayne Michaels, he's also gay, is that he's a photographer who doesn't trust the appearance of things. And that idea of suddenly thinking about the way that something appears is not necessarily the truth of that thing. That was really profound to me. The one on the right is, I'll read it. He does a lot of stuff where he writes things that sort of undermines what you're seeing in the picture. But the one on the right says, "This photograph is my proof. This photograph is my proof there was that afternoon when things were still good between us. And she embraced me, and we were so happy. It did happen. Look, see for yourself." You get the feeling, of course, that person's not being entirely honest with themselves, that this image and also what they're saying about it isn't real. And of course, these people are just models. They don't have anything to do with what Dwayne Michaels is writing here. And so this whole idea of how reality And what we say about reality and what we think about reality and how we interpret reality is sometimes a very complicated, well, let's just use the word ball of wax. I can't think of anything better right now, but it's a very complicated thing, the way that our relationship with reality and feelings and all this stuff comes together. So my photographs were never really meant to be about what actually happens to me. They were visual metaphors about things that was going on, but I never really imagined that people would be able to decipher them, and most of the time they can't. My images were also manipulated because I still really wanted to be a painter. So I was working in black and white, but I was using all of these kinds of inks and dyes and hand applied colors to sort of create these images that look more like paintings. And I got to say, that painting over there where, she's looking up with that dreamy, sort of starstruck look in her face. I loved work like that as a kid because, it's like theater, it's like you're watching this kind of play unfold. And so I've often said my work as a performance artist, it kind of looks theatrical more than most performance art, but it's really more about that concept of theater. It's that theater is a way in which we create these kinds of elaborate fictions to talk about something real. And we do that in real life too. We construct, all kinds of mental responses to what's going on that interpret it and metaphorize it and create something out of reality. So go to the next one. That's a quote by Picasso. You heard all kinds of different versions of it too, but it's something that resonated with me as well. So all of these are from the early 90s, which is, the core of the AIDS crisis. As a young person, sort of figuring things out about everything during that time was, I think, very challenging and frightening. And so I think I was trying to find some beauty in bodies that were really thought of as being criminalized in so many different ways, and all bodies that had all kinds of negative connotations. I was trying to do something that had a kind of beauty to it. And this is also a time, where I was processing all of this stuff in terms of celebrities who played around with the edges of performative gender, thinking about the way they dressed, thinking about the way they presented themselves. This was me back when I had hair. Oh my, I know. So I had kind of a David Bowie haircut. I always tell my students, you're not always going to look like you do. And what you are wearing right now will one day be a Halloween costume. They don't believe me ever. So the idea of taking on different personas, different identities, that really has always been a kind of core of what I do. A lot of times it has to do with the idea of what we think of in terms of clothing as being masculine or feminine. How do we interpret gender on a daily basis? How do we decide what we're going to present to the world as we go out and do it? And it's funny too, I've never done what I think of as drag in the conventional sense, but I've worn a lot of dresses. And also, I worked at a Pizza Hut where everybody was a drag queen. It was the best job I've ever had. And the only one who wasn't was this, really dumb redneck named Jerry who drove a gold Trans Am and did deliveries. And he didn't seem to have a clue about it all. And I feel like that's going to be a sitcom that I'm going to sell at some point. Drag queen, Pizza Hut. But the idea of putting on a dress, it's, even now, it's still very controversial. I think Little Nas X is finding out all this stuff about wearing dresses, and it's gonna piss some people off. But it's an interesting experience because I had always envisioned, like in my brain, I had always thought of myself as a very feminine person, again, coming from Alabama and being the sissy kid and all this sort of thing. But it's like if you put on a dress, and all I could think is like, boy, I really look like a man. It's interesting to see how that spectrum of presentation and concept about gender, how that really works. So art history has always been a very important thing to me. I'm actually really hyped about getting to look at these paintings after I get done and see if these people are who I think they are, or if they're just people who are copying the people who I think they are. Caravaggio was really important to me as an undergraduate and a graduate student. I always joke that I used to look through our history books looking for cute guys. But this is in the Kansas City. If you've never seen it, it's an amazing painting. Let's go to the next one. So I did my own version of some of Caravaggio's paintings for a while. This is who was my boyfriend in college, Joey Manley, who wrote a book called The Death of Donna Mae Dean. And I only mentioned that because like about a year ago, some students from the University of Alabama contacted me to interview me about that book. Joey passed away, and I had no idea anybody knew about that book anymore. It didn't sell very much. So if you know about that book, it's an interesting book. After a while, though, you sort of feel like you're just doing somebody else's work or wearing somebody else's clothes. So I started adopting that kind of 17th century language, sort of Baroque art with the heavy shadows and things like that. Again, that's an example of it over there. The image on your right is one of my favorites was in grad school. I had this dream where I whistled and like all of these butterflies just came and sort of, fluttered all over my body. It was just the most amazing dream. All right, that's a lie. This friend of mine, a painter, Sydney Walker, had that dream, but like Tim Miller, she did not deserve that dream. That dream was like misdirected mail. It should have been in my mailbox, and it wasn't. So there was a kind of darkness about that period. I mean, again, we didn't know what was going on with AIDS at all. It was a very scary time. And so I started doing images that were shrouded figures like this. These are about 6.5 feet tall. They're really big photographs. And even then, I thought about this really more in a positive light. I looked at the shroud and thought about it as a kind of cocoon, and thought about the idea of a butterfly again, coming from a cocoon, the idea of transforming from one state to another state. So this next piece was a kind of pivotal work in that series where also a very large photograph. I would use different kinds of chemical treatments to make them have these visual effects. Like this one, the surface is really reflective, almost like a mirror. And so there are 300 razor blades hanging from the ceiling on top. What I thought was amazing about this was the way that the razor blades would sort of flutter when people would walk around. They look like goldfish in the reflections. And I loved that idea of something that, again, is one thing, a razor blade, dangerous, sharp, can hurt you, but it appeared to be something entirely different. It appeared to be something that was, really gossamer and lovely. And also the putting together of this work was really important. I did all of the tying of the knots and hanging them up myself. And there was this kind of repetition that made me think of my family. Like everybody in my family had factory jobs. My father, in fact, was killed in an industrial accident when I was in sixth grade. My mother worked at a cookie factory, worked in a shoe factory, things like that. And so that was the norm for people in my family to go and do these repetitive things, all day long. And so that's when I began to think about the idea of how an action can have some sort of meaning. Like this was when I started to really transform into a performance artist. So in the next piece, it was a kind of performative translation of that cocoon idea. And so the way I did this in 3 or 4 different venues, but the way it would work was basically, wrapped in duct tape and duct tape. Paul Harvey actually talked about this piece on his show, and I know you guys are old enough to remember Paul Harvey. It got a photograph of it went out over the AP service, and so I'm assuming that's how he found it. But he did a really kind of funny spot about it. But basically, the way it worked is that when people would come into the gallery, I would already be there, and I wouldn't, and I wouldn't be there until they leave. So it's like they never really saw me becoming what was essentially a kind of sculpture. I was just there like all of the other art. And then after the show is over, after the opening is over, we would cut away the duct tape and kind of leave the shed skin again, referencing that idea of something that emerges, that's something that comes out changed. And that's kind of what the shed skin would look like. Also about that time, thinking about that repetitive action of tying those knots on the razor blades and things like that. I did a piece for my 30th birthday where I tied a knot in a piece of string for every day that I'd been alive, which is 10,935 knots. I counted them twice to make sure I did it right. My performance teacher, Rachel Rosenthal, she worked out of Los Angeles. I was flying out there to do workshops under her. She had a real big influence on me. She was a pretty major player in the women's art movement in the late 70s and early 80s. Won a couple of Obie awards for performances that she did. And I changed my haircut to fit hers at this point. So David Bowie's out. These are just some other artists that I think of as being, I guess you'd say, kindred spirits, very much connected to the Dada movement from the early 20th century, as well as the revised version from the 60s. There's actually a young artist now named Adam Pendleton, who's just opened a show in the atrium of MoMA in New York, who writes about the idea of Black Dada. And it is a really amazing, he's put together a reader about all of these different influences that sort of weave the idea of race into the concept of Dada in a really fascinating way. John Cage is the experimental composer. I do performances of his work as well. Most fascinating thing I found out about John Cage recently was that he and Freddie Mercury had the same birthday. So I feel like there's something cosmic about that. These were two, unbelievable queer musicians that have had these this great influence on my life. I also, for a time, was taking classes in this Japanese dance form called Butoh. I hurt my back at a certain point, so I don't really do anything that's related to that anymore. But the idea of that transformation is a key thing for me. Being able to become different personas, different roles in different situations, and I think the way that it plays out in the work is a kind of bigger manifestation of this idea of how we all do that. Like, how you can go into a certain situation and you behave slightly differently in order to do what needs to be done. And I think that's something that really intrigues me just about humans, is that we're very malleable, that we're sensitive to what's going on, that we're sensitive to other people's needs, that we oftentimes repackage ourselves to fit the needs of the time. So this was a piece that was about my grandmother. When I went to college, my grandmother just did not understand any of what was going on. And so she felt that I was doing this, to be leaving her, and she would say, "Oh, Jeff, why do you want to leave me? Why do you want to?" She had a really thick kind of Appalachian accent, and why do you want to leave me? Why are you going to go so far away? Leave me. And so this this performance was, I think I was trying to explain it to her in a language that she would understand. And so I used one of the records, a gospel song from her collection. She had all these gospel records, and so I used the song and sort of did the patter of one of those old timey preachers, and it was all about, I didn't mean, the ending it was, I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't mean to leave you. Oh, I didn't mean to leave you. She went to a foot washing church. And so I went with her a lot when I was a kid, because she would watch me while my parents were working. And I mean, that kind of thing to a kid is like, this is crazy. but they're all just so normal, where you again see people that are transforming themselves because of this situation. That's Mr. Thompson that sells his barbecue at his store, and now he's rolling around on the floor. So an image from this performance ended up on the cover of a magazine, an arts magazine from London. And I mean, I thought, okay, here's this moment, where my family don't understand this at all. How do you explain this? And I thought, my mother understands what magazines are. She knows that if you're on the cover of a magazine, that means something. And I thought, Mom, check out this magazine. I'm on the cover of a magazine. And I mean this in the nicest possible way. In fact, I think this is actually the sweetest thing she ever said, and I love it. But she flips through it, and she actually read the article. And I said, "What'd you think?" "Well, Jeff, I just don't understand why anybody would pay to fly you to Europe to rub ice on your chest." And I thought, oh. So after I became an administrator, I realized that putting on a suit and tie was just another costume. And I was, stretching outside of my art bubble and talking to people from the business school and talking to people from the sciences and talking to people that had, no inkling of what the arts do and what kind of things that we obsess over. But, it felt like a performance always. And I started to relate it to tap dancing. I started watching all these old movies where people would tap dance, because that's the hardest thing in the world, and your feet hurt something awful, but you just got to keep on smiling. And you got to make it look easy. I realized that was the biggest part of being in this kind of job, is that you must make it appear effortless. And eventually I learned how to do that. But in the art, there was a lot about that kind of disparity between, what you're actually experiencing in the moment, and how you simply have to just keep smiling and say what has to be said. So I called this the suit suite. And I started working with the idea of ties and suits and things like this. So this was the box suit. And this performance is kind of related to an early Dada piece where Hugo Ball was dressed up like a what he called the magic bishop. So I was the magic administrator. I was the magic office worker, but you notice I don't have any arms. And so there's that sense of, you're here to have this certain kind of appearance. And so the performance had to do with, I let the audience pick out what kind of tie I should wear to tell them something very important, to deliver some really important news. And they debated it and hashed it out, and they picked the tie that they thought was appropriate. But then when I deliver the important news, it's just a lot of gibberish. And that's kind of related to what Hugo Ball was doing. But it's the words to a Bruce Springsteen song, just done in this weird way. He's the boss, and there's no meaning to it. And in a sense, I think a lot of times, especially when people get into what I think of as biz speak, monetize the effective synergy. It's like, that doesn't mean anything. What are you talking about? Just tell me what you want me to do. What are we trying to accomplish here? So another thing that I liked about my job was office supplies. I love office supplies. There's this inherent promise that you're going to get your shit together. And no matter how much you're sweating, no matter how much your feet hurt from all the tap dancing, you have got a color-coded system that is going to help you get through this week. But I especially love Post-it notes because I just think they're just beautiful. And this is kind of a thing of like, when you're a kid, you personify everything. I started to feel sorry for Post-it notes because most of the time what we write on them is just the most banal thing. Sign here, please return. So I started collecting lists of beautiful words, and you can go on the internet and find these kind of things, beautiful words in different languages. And so the idea behind this piece was that I had my list, and I was writing a beautiful word on each Post-it note and then putting them together in this kind of configuration on a window. So it kind of looked like stained glass. I thought that was a kind of transformative thing about the material. Usually I was performing these in a festival, which was kind of means that other performances and other events are going on. So people were coming and going, and I would get them to participate by giving me a beautiful word, sometimes in different languages, things like that. So this was Symphony Number 1, Beautiful Notes for Toronto. Let's go on to the next one. It's still the same piece. I've done this one in about 4 to 5 different locations. This was in Salt Lake City, and it was in the Salt Lake City Public Library, which I think is a great connection, but it was on a glass elevator. So as people were riding up and down, they would talk to me about beautiful words. So just other examples of recent performances. The one that really is the most recent is from 2018. It had to do with a stroke that I had in 2017. I was actually in the office, of course, alone. And the title is "The Universe is Shit-Faced." And the story that I tell about this is that the only thing I knew about strokes before I had a stroke was from a book I read called My Stroke of Insight. And it's a neuroscientist, and it's a really fascinating book. But she described the process, and she described it really well. And then I knew immediately what was happening when it started. Oh my God, I'm having a stroke. And her impression of the whole experience was that your sense of self stretched out and sort of became one with the cosmos. In retrospect, I do think that there was something like that going on. I had this really weird sense of time. I kind of felt like I was all over the room at once. But the immediate sensation was that I was absolutely drunk. And so if this is communicating with the universe is shit-faced. So the idea of masculinity is something also I think that's just been part of my work from day one. I think it's fascinating that in the early 18th century, this was a masculine man. And his legs, especially, you know, he was virile, he was masculine, because at this point, masculinity was all about money. If you had money, you were the, you know, you were the king. Our idea of masculinity is so different and so also equally weird. But, you know, Bruce Willis looked like my father, which is another kind of odd connection I've got to all of this. So I'm fascinated by operas from the 18th century, where you oftentimes have castrato singers, you know, out there singing these really high voices. Heroes when the thought is burning all over. So we think, oh my God, what a fruit. This is what they saw at the time, you know, because the castratos were always the generals and they were the warriors, and that kind of florid singing was part of the power of what they could do. And so I invented a kind of butch persona for myself. This is Deck. And I think of this as, go ahead and go to the next one. It's kind of like bro drag. And so the idea behind Deck is that when I was a student, I did not do the things that students do. I was incredibly nose to the grindstone. And the truth is, I was so afraid that my family was going to abandon me that I knew I had to make money as soon as I possibly could. I knew I had to get through school and get a job and be self-sufficient as soon as possible. So I never went out. You know, I never had, you know, fun in that kind of college sense. So Deck is part of, it's part of that you know, as Deck, he is carefree, he's confident, he's, you know, he's got this sort of devil may care attitude that I always cared too much to have. He's filling that role of the college era that I missed. And he's also getting to hang out with the bros, which I've always been fascinated about, but never had any kind of entry or view into that sort of world. So this project developed as the internet was happening. I don't think these are going to play, but there's 2 videos on here. And so his reality is the internet. You know, of course, he's not real. He goes out and does things in real situations, music festivals, bars, things like that. But it's the documentation that's the reality, the pictures, you know, getting things on, you know, he's got a presence on Facebook, getting things on Instagram, getting things on TikTok. A friend of mine described it as this, a streak of authenticity padded by a lot of foam. It's interesting because when you are Deck, people treat you like the appearance, you know, they give you that energy. And again, like, as in reality, that was something I never really experienced before. Now, as time has, you know, as Deck has developed his own life, he's started to do things that I can't do, like longboarding and skateboarding and snowboarding and things like that. So this is where it gets all weirder even still, that somebody else now plays my ideal version of myself. I mean, I think at some point I did realize, like, this is probably the son that my father would have rather had, you know? And it's kind of sad, but hey, I can do this, you know? I can be this when I need to. So I'm not sad about it at all. So here he is out partying. And he's also started to make art himself, you know, to add just one more layer. So here's all of his. So recently, Deck and I collaborated on a project. There's a video that's I made where I recreate the stroke as a video game, and Deck is playing me as the avatar. So I go through the day as it led up to this event. You know, Deck makes choices about me checking my phone, getting a drink, stamping things and signing things. It's just boring office work. It's a really boring video game. And then, you know, it happens. So I guess in closing, I just want to say again, thank you. I haven't talked about my work in a long time. So I hope you think I did a good job. I hope you think this was interesting. It's only been 40 minutes. So if you didn't think it was interesting, it's going to be over in 41 seconds. Thank you all again. I guess I can answer questions if anyone has any. Oh, it's only a phone call. And my husband laughs about this because when I'm talking to my sister, it's just pretty immediately, y'all. Yeah.
So I was curious about the duct tape scene with the rock over your head. Talk about that.
Oh, you mean just the rock itself? It's 4 bricks that are kind of wound together with some rope. You know, I don't remember what I was thinking at the time. I know when I was making the change between giving up doing photography all the time and just doing performance, I didn't quite know what it was about. And I remember thinking that, you know, there was this idea that I was reaching for that was always about this far out in front of my head, and you never catch up with it. You know, I think it's kind of like a video game thing too. Like you never get to that part that you're chasing. I think it had something to do with that, you know, that there was this thing that was always about that distance in front of me that I was not quite able to grasp. It looks more, you know, sort of Damocles than I intended. But I think that's interesting that sometimes things that you intend come out a whole different way that you don't really understand until much later or never at all. Yeah. Well, I used to go by Jeffrey Byrd, and I think as a Southerner with low self-esteem, you think a decision like that is going to make you sound fancy. And I think when I resigned as department head, I thought, well, it's time to make another change. And I just did not want to be Jeffrey anymore. It just sounds so clipped and prissy. And it is. Rufus was my father's middle name. He was James Rufus Byrd, and everybody called him JR. And I've outlived him. You know, he died much younger than I am right now. And for a while, Deck's name was Rufus. And I thought, I'm going to take that back. And I'm going to take that part of that identity back for myself. I mean, Rufus is just such a much cooler name, though, isn't it? You know? Yeah.
Your sexual orientation informed help you with your work or focus?
That's a good question. I mean, I think I've just always made art about what's going on. And especially in say, while I was in school, that was what I was figuring out. I was trying to figure out this gay thing. so it kind of formed the core of it, really. I don't know if it's as present at this point as it was. Now that I'm gonna, I'm not gonna be wearing suits all the time. It may change again. I mean, at this point I'm thinking about aging. What does it mean to be gay and old? A lot of it's just invisibility. And I think there may be some interesting pieces that could come out of the idea of being invisible, and different ways of visually manifesting that. I think it's interesting that what I would call gay culture is so focused on being young. I don't know if any of us really know how to do it old. I mean, what I say to my doctor all the time is, I don't know. I've never been this old before. I mean, it all seems like we got to just make this stuff up. Yeah.
So as one of your many students, I just want to personally thank you for being you, because when I first had your class, way back, I was still in the closet, and you inspired me to be myself. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being you.
Oh, thank you.
Is now that I'm an art educator at the elementary level. As an educator, how do you de-stress at the end of the day? Because it's very stressful for me at the elementary level. I can only imagine for you.
It's gotten a lot easier now that I'm out of office. I was sort of like, oh, why didn't I do this sooner? We had to get kids through college. That's why I didn't do it sooner. But honestly, I think you really got to remember to take time to do stuff just for yourself. Because I honestly, I didn't do it very well. I mean, I was always just so obsessed about trying to take care of anything that needed to happen, because you just don't know what's going to come up tomorrow. Things will always come up tomorrow. So like, take that time, meditate. I think meditation is a gift. I've been much better at it lately, but I've always done it little bits. But I think that's a key thing, is to just kind of clear your brain out. You'll feel better. You really will. I was going to say, you're thanking me for just being me. And I thought, well, I could say, well, I don't know how to be anybody else, but we both know that's not true. I know how to be a lot of people.
I just want to tell you thank you for coming and representing you and I and the art department there. And I thought I would be the only one in the room that could say that I was an art graduate from the UNI. And I find out there's a whole other generation behind me.
We're everywhere.
I know. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all.
It's a tradition of FFBC, for at least our in-person meetings, to give our speaker a copy of the Gay Men's Chorus on CD.
Oh,
And it's on CD, actual CDs. You don't. Seems like everyone streams everything, but you won't find. You might be able to search and find some of their music.
even more special.
You can listen to that on the way home.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All. Thank you all.
Okay, I have to take this off, otherwise I won't be able to read. Well, thank you. Fascinating, because I'm not an art person, but I've studied art, and definitely in college, and how art influences life and life influences art. But also how your life experience impacted your art over the years, particularly the performance art. And most interesting was that you said your appearance as Deck impacted how you were treated. And that's true in a positive and a negative way. People are treated the way they look, and that isn't always the best way to treat people. So on that reminder, Iowa Safe School Spirit Award ceremony is this evening. You have to get tickets for that, I believe. So go to their website 2 p.m. today, One Iowa is the cross movement fight for abortion access. Monday at noon is Interfaith Alliance's Understanding and Dismantling Racism. Upcoming speakers, November 5th will be Steve Carlin, KCCI news anchor. He will talk about mental health. December 3rd or January 7th, we're nailing this down, will be Lauren Olson, who is in audience with us today, award-winning author of the book Finally Out, which I have read, and a new book soon to be released, No More Neckties. February 4th will be Edward Kelly, who had an opinion piece in the Des Moines Register on September 5th, 2021, titled My Journey from an Anti-Gay Activist to LGBTQ Ally. March 4th will be Mark Babcock, who sang with Leonard Bernstein and Robert Shaw and has performed at Carnegie Hall and the New York Philharmonic. We'll speak about playing the Carillon, if I pronounce that right, at Caroline. Okay, well, it doesn't spelled like that. Caroline, okay. At St. Paul's Episcopal Church. He plays live weekly on Sundays. See our website with a link to the Des Moines Register article if you want to read more about that. June 4th, at our annual scholarship award ceremony, will be Becky Smith, who is Executive Director of Iowa Safe Schools. So please see our website for more detail on the upcoming speakers. I'd like to welcome everyone to suggest potential speakers. We're constantly looking and trying to find things people will be interested in. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending and have a wonderful weekend.